Today, let's dive into the story of one of Brazil's most iconic brands, Casas Bahia. It's this massive retail empire, right? But it was built on an idea that sounds, well, completely backwards. They decided to trust the very customers the entire financial system had written off.
And this quote right here from the founder, Samuel Klein, it's everything. I mean, it's not just some nice feel-good saying. This was literally the blueprint for a business model that tapped into a multi-billion-dollar market nobody else could see. You really have to understand where Samuel Klein came from to get the full picture. His story is, well, it's unbelievable. In 1944, he literally escapes a Nazi death march. Just a few years later, in 52, he makes it to Brazil. He's a Holocaust survivor, has his wife and son with him, and just $6,000 in his pocket. And then, get this, only 5 years after that, he opens his first store. He calls it Casa Bahia. So the big question is, how do you go from that to a retail giant? Well, it all boiled down to one thing. He saw a massive opportunity where literally everyone else just saw a huge risk.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's the 1950s in Brazil. There's this huge industrial boom happening, and it pulls over 1 million people from the Northeast, a lot of them from the state of Bahia, by the way, to São Paulo to work in the factories. And these folks became what we could call the invisible customer. Think about it. They had steady jobs, they had dreams, they wanted to build a better life, but they had no access to banks, no credit, nothing. The entire consumer economy was just closed off to them.
Now, before there was ever a store, Klein was out on the streets. He was a door-to-door salesman with a cart, selling things like linens and towels. But here's the absolute game changer. From the very first day, he let his customers pay in installments. He was basically running a live experiment on the streets, building a whole credit model based on nothing more than a handshake and someone's good name. Okay, so how do you take that, a guy with a cart, and scale it into a retail empire? Well, it all came down to one system, a system that would become the beating heart of the company for decades. And this is where the real genius is. He formalized this whole thing into what's known as the crediario. So here's how it worked. First, you'd get approved for credit based on your character, not some credit score. Then you'd get this thing called a Carnê. It's basically a little payment booklet. But now, check out step 4. This is so smart. To make your monthly payment, you had to physically come back to the store and walk all the way to the back, past all the shiny new products, just to get to the cashier. It was an absolute masterstroke, right? He turned a chore, paying off a debt, into a constant sales opportunity. And if you want to know the real secret sauce of the business, here it is. By the 2000s, get this, a staggering 90% of the company's total revenue came from the interest on those payment plans. Think about that for a second. They weren't really a retail company that offered credit. No, they were a finance company that just happened to sell stuff out front. So on top of this killer financial engine, Klein started building a fortress around the business. First, he vertically integrated. He started his own furniture factory, Movi Spartira, which let him control costs and basically double his margins on furniture. Smart. Then he insisted on buying the land his stores were on instead of renting. This built up a massive, stable real estate portfolio. And finally, he kept the name Casa Bahia. It was a very deliberate choice, a signal to his customers that this was their store. And all of this together, it made the company incredibly tough. It was basically built to survive the wild economic storms that are, pretty common in Brazil's history. And boy, did that model get tested. You look at the early 90s, Brazil's hit with this insane hyperinflation crisis. The economy is just in a free fall and sales crater. Klein has to close stores, but he doesn't panic. He holds on, he preserves the core of the business, and he keeps his faith in his customers. And then, when the Plano Real finally stabilized the economy in '94, that trust was paid back big time. His customers suddenly had purchasing power again, and sales just exploded. It was proof of the incredible loyalty he'd built up for decades. But of course, time marches on. The 21st century rolled in, and with it came a whole new set of challenges. The very thing that made Casas Bahia a giant, that physical, in-person model, was now under threat from the digital age. And it led to a real fight for survival. And look, the company made some really big mistakes. In 2021, they tried to rebrand to sound more modern. They changed the name to Via. Via, it's so generic. And it just completely erased 60 years of brand loyalty and the deep connection people had with the name Casas Bahia. It was a totally self-inflicted wound.
You combine that with a mountain of debt, and the company was pushed right to the edge.
So in 2023, a new CEO comes in and launches this incredibly aggressive turnaround plan. And we're not talking about a little tweak here and there. This was major surgery. Just look at the numbers. They had to restructure over 4 billion reais in debt. They slashed over $1 billion in inventory, and they made the really tough call to reduce the workforce. It was all about stabilizing the ship and getting back to what made them great in the first place. And you know what? The painful medicine actually worked. The company has now posted 8 consecutive quarters of improving profit margins. The comeback is real, and it's all built on getting back to those core principles, just, updated for today.
So where do they go from here? What does the future look like? Well, it's pretty cool, actually. It's about taking Samuel Klein's original idea and building a whole digital ecosystem around it. Remember that little physical payment booklet, the Carnê? Well, that has now evolved into Bankie, which is a full-on digital bank right on your smartphone. And the mission? It's exactly the same. Serve the millions of Brazilians who are still outside the traditional banking system. The only difference is that the platform is now digital, it's scalable, and it's already serving over 8 million people.
The new strategy is also about being smart and pragmatic. The company had to admit, hey, we can't be the best at everything. So instead of trying to fight the tech giants, they decided to partner up with them. They made a deal with Mercado Libre, which instantly gives them access to the biggest e-commerce audience in all of Latin America. And they moved their data over to Google Cloud. This one's amazing. It cut the time it takes to process data from 6 hours down to just 2 minutes. That opens the door for all kinds of new AI tools. And that really brings us right back to where we started. Samuel Klein built an entire empire by seeing value in a customer that everyone else had written off. He proved that there was a fortune to be made by serving the so-called bottom of the pyramid, and not as charity, but as a genuinely brilliant business strategy. So, the question I want to leave you with is pretty simple. In your world, in your industry, who are the invisible customers?